So Krishnaji was handed over charge of education by Mrs. Besant in 1926. She said to him, "You are the world teacher, therefore you should take charge of education." He was still part of the Theosophical Society at that time. And immediately he asked for and searched for 300 acres of land near Madanapalli, which was his birthplace. And that's how the Rishi Valley School was founded. And similarly, he wanted 400 acres of land on the banks of the Ganges in Varanasi, Kashi. And Mr. Sanjeev Rao was actively pursuing this project, which seemed almost impossible, but he realized it. So these were the two original schools, both intended to be residential schools, started by Krishnamurti. His reason for wanting a residential school was that he wanted the education to be holistic, so that one is not only helping the student with the intellectual abilities and skills that we impart in education, but also look after his physical well-being, his emotional well-being, and the spiritual side of it. These are the four aspects of our life. They are not exclusive. They interact with each other. But unless one has a high quality of life in all the four, you don't really have a high quality of life. And he felt that we need to help the student, education must help the student to come upon a life of high quality. He also pointed out that there is an intimate connection between the contents of our consciousness, what he called our conditioning, and the state of our society. And it is the school, or rather the bringing up of the young child, which determines the contents of his consciousness. So he felt that the present vision of education was inadequate because it was emphasizing only intellectual development and skills, which are all stored in memory, but not helping him to come upon a deep understanding of life, of himself, and of his relationship with other people, with nature, with colleagues, with work, and so on. So he said, education must help the child to discover all that. The present day education is producing a lopsided mind in the child, knowledgeable in a particular area of his expertise, intelligent in that area, but extremely ignorant in other areas. And he was aware of the fact that if we didn't have the understanding of life and of our consciousness, Then we come upon the ego consciousness, which affects all our relationships adversely, creating conflicts both within our personal relationships and between with colleagues, and much worse than that, extending to divisions in society and in the world. So he felt that education must take on the responsibility of transforming the consciousness of the child. Something which is necessary also for the adults, and where his teaching was addressing these questions. But he realized that it is a bit difficult for adults to effect this change because they get habituated to living with whatever conditioning they have learned in childhood, and they find it extremely difficult to change. So he wanted to address education, meaning the entire bringing up of the child. That's why he wanted residential school, because then you are in charge of the child 24 hours of the day. And you can look at his physical well-being, his intellectual skills, his emotional well-being, and also the spiritual. He said the present day education is empowering the child, giving him knowledge and skills which translate to power, but not giving him or helping him come upon wisdom. And power without wisdom gets misused, goes wrong. He said there has been no psychological evolution. There has been material evolution, there has been biological evolution, but there has been no psychological evolution. That modern man is, in his consciousness, is almost like the primitive man. The primitive man identified himself with his tribe and fought with other tribes for procuring things for his own tribe and created enmities and so on. And we are still in the same state. Only those tribes now have become nations or religious groups or ideological groups. And we have had wars between ideological groups, between national groups, and also religious wars. So he questioned whether we are really intelligent or we are only intelligent in one segment of life, namely professional job, which you do. There you demand a certain intelligence, which is the intelligence of skill and thought. And he said, real intelligence is there only when there is compassion, which is part of wisdom. And to come upon wisdom, you have to have self-knowledge, which is the key to wisdom. This self-knowledge is an unlearning process, unlearning the false, which is the illusion in the mind. But at present, the education that we are imparting all over the globe, not just in India or in the United States, is subtly conditioning the child into conforming to society. And he made a very startling remark. He said, it is no sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. He perceived that society was sick with all these divisions that I have just talked about. And the amount of cruelty and crime and violence that one sees all around, including violence towards other species and animals. And so it is necessary to create a new mind, a new consciousness, which relates differently with nature, with property, with human beings, and with ideas and ideologies. All that is part of self-knowledge. You can't teach that as a course. It is not just knowledge. It comes from deeper perception, which requires that one must create an inquiring, learning mind in the child. At present, we are emphasizing achievement, we are emphasizing knowledge and memory, which is where the knowledge and skills are held. And the entire education is set up in the factory model. The raw material is the child, comes into this factory called education at the age of 6. We formulate various courses and programs to fashion that mind for 14 or 15 years. And at the end of it, there comes an engineer, a doctor, an artist, a psychologist, a specialist who does the work we want done in society. There is little or no concern whether this child will be a happy human being, creative human being, or he will be a bored human being, struggling within himself and forcing himself to do the work that he has to do, and therefore constantly seeking to escape through pleasure. So it becomes a process that promotes ego. And it is also used in education as an incentive. You threaten the child with punishment if he doesn't do homework. And it does make the child do more homework as demanded by you, and maybe learn a little more mathematics or English, whatever subject you are teaching. But you have also damaged him psychologically, because that fear creates disorder in him, the fear of punishment. You're also sending him a message that a powerful and older person can dominate over and force a younger person, which is violence. So you are also sending him the message that violence can be used when it is towards a desirable end, which contradicts the principle that the means are the end. The means are not separate from the end. Similarly, competition is used as another motivation, which also promotes the ego. It tells the child that he is in a race with all the other classmates and colleagues, and he has to outdo them in every aspect of education. That teaches rivalry, it contradicts brotherhood and friendship, and does a lot of damage to the child. It makes it very difficult for him to work cooperatively with other human beings later in life. So all these condition the child, mind of the child, and this becomes part of his consciousness. Not only the knowledge, but also the values that he sees operating in society around him in the education process. So all that is also conditioning. And you can see this conditioning reflected in the state of our society. We have tremendous expertise in computer science, in agriculture, in transport, and so on. And we have even traveled to the moon. So great progress in that direction, but extremely primitive in the psychological realm, because that has not been addressed. So even the highly educated man is quite confused whether love is the same thing as desire. Is it the same thing as attachment, as admiration, as possessiveness? What is really love? You can even ask university professors, and you will find that they are quite ignorant about what love is, though everybody expresses the opinion that love is the greatest thing in life. So this ignorance is extremely palpable. The present system of education produces no understanding of oneself, which means also no understanding of our relationships. So one of the concerns Krishnamurti had in education was to help create sensitivity in the child. Now, sensitivity has also been given a very superficial meaning in society. We say this man is very sensitive, be careful in dealing with him. That means he easily gets hurt. If you point out, criticize him, or point out a truth which he doesn't like, he gets deeply hurt and so on. We say he's a very sensitive person. That's not real sensitivity. Sensitivity, in the sense Krishnamurti used that term, is to perceive the joy that is innately there in every aspect of life. There is tremendous joy in art, in music, in literature, in games and sports, in friendship, in your work, in science, in mathematics. The joy is the perception of beauty, which is innately there, but it won't come unless you pay attention to it. And when you give importance to achievement and make the child ambitious to get certain results, whether in the examination or otherwise, he is unable to pay attention in the present because his attention is directed towards the result. And therefore he develops insensitivity. So is it possible to discuss all this with the child? You can't create sensitivity, but you can point out these problems which come from giving too much emphasis on achievement. We hardly talk to the children. I mean, I went through education and did a PhD. Nobody ever talked to me about what is love or about these dangers of ambition and so on. If I had not attended the lectures of Krishnamurti, I would never have come to these questions. I would have accepted that as a norm in life and gone on. So in a sense, education does a great harm to the child by cultivating this ego process and this division process in which he's proud of his own country, his own religion, his own language, and so on, and identifies with it. And that divides him from other people in the world, which is what creates this psychological division and eventually leads to war. So Krishna said, you have to, if you are imparting knowledge which is necessary for functioning in the world, you must also take the responsibility to impart or help the child to come upon wisdom. And wisdom comes from self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is all this sensitivity. Sensitivity comes from attention, which means you have to be in the present. Your mind should be in the present. The human consciousness has this big problem that I may be engaging in some activity and yet I may be completely absent mentally from there. I may be thinking of something else, either in the past or in the future. And if you're not paying attention in the present, you don't perceive the beauty. And therefore, you become insensitive. The perception of beauty is not like knowledge. It won't come all that easily. You have to, you can test this yourself. You listen to classical music. In the beginning, you don't perceive the beauty. But you listen for many hours to a variety of classical music, and you will begin to develop the sense of beauty and appreciation. So it takes a while to develop the sensitivity in the mind. And love, friendship, affection, compassion are all part of sensitivity. Without sensitivity, you can't get there. Through all kinds of intellectual analysis and so on, you will come upon definitions of love and all this, and you may be able to explain that, but you will not have that sensitivity. So he wanted to change education, and in order to take this larger responsibility for the whole of the child's life, it was necessary to have a residential school. Otherwise, the parents create a very different atmosphere in the home, which contradicts what the teacher is trying to do in the school. And the child gets confused between the home atmosphere and this atmosphere. A child is educated not by just what we speak in the classroom. He is educated far more by what he sees actually going on around him, both in the educational institution and in society. So it's the responsibility of whole of society, and a Krishnamurti school is meant to be an experiment in right living. We don't know what right living is. We posit it as the unknown. And you have a small society of 500 people, about 300 children, 50 teachers, another 50 workers, and so on, who are living on the campus. If in this small microcosm of society of 500 people, you can live with completely different values, without all that religious division, casteism, national pride, and all that, and engage in both the quest for truth as science and knowledge, and the quest for truth, which is religion. At present, even highly educated people consider religion to be just belief. And therefore, religion or religious inquiry has been completely thrown out of education, except maybe in some departments of specialization. But as we see, it is necessary for every human being to have this understanding and to free himself of the ego process to whatever extent he is able to. So with these things in mind, he tried to change education. And that is right education for the 21st century. Because our problems are no longer that we don't have sufficiently fast computers or planes or cell phones or any of these gadgets, transportation. We have solved those problems. Healthcare, we have more or less solved those problems. Even if we have not solved in some parts of the world, we know how those things are solved, and it's just a matter of time and effort to solve them there. But these psychological problems continue from generation to generation. We have never been free from war and division, including religious divisions and so on. So that kind of intelligence does not apply here, does not solve these problems. And you need a different kind of intelligence called wisdom, which comes from self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is what knowledge you acquire through your own perception of what is true and what is false, which is really an unlearning process. You unlearn the false. Otherwise, you maintain society. So if you grow up in India, your mind is infected with casteism. And if you don't question that, you practice casteism in your life. Your mind practices it. It looks at people differently depending on which caste they belong to and relate differently. And that maintains casteism in society. So there is this intimate connection between the state of mind, our state of mind, and our state of our society. In a sense, the outer and inner are not independent of each other. The outer becomes the inner, and the inner maintains the outer. That's the difficulty of this transformation, which is a revolution at the level of the psyche. It's not a revolution, not a violent revolution of overthrow. That has been tried. People have overthrown and put a different group of people to head the government. But those people become corrupt for the same reason the previous people were corrupt. They are also ignorant people. So without wisdom, it will never solve, which is what we are experiencing. And with all the power that has been released by science and technology, this state has become much more dangerous than it was 1,000 years ago. At that time, war meant a few people went with spears and horses and so on and fought with another group of people in a field or something. All the population and the rest of the people were not involved. Now you can decimate a whole city or whole country probably with one bomb. We have already experienced that when in the Second World War, America dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tremendous ability. Comes from progress at the other end. But that progress turns devastating when it's not coupled with wisdom. So Krishnaji wanted that in education, we must be concerned with cultivating knowledge, excellent knowledge, but at the same time, excellence at the level of consciousness, which requires self-knowledge and this understanding of right relationship with everything around. And that in turn demands sensitivity. If you are not sensitive, you can't be aware because you don't even notice things which are not important to you. And your mind has already formulated what is important. Achievement is important. Ambition is important. Success is important. So Krishnamurti had another startling statement to make. He said, success is mediocrity. Because who is the successful man? The man who accepts all this setup, climbs every ladder that is put in front of him, and comes out on top, having beaten all his fellow students and colleagues, comes out on the top. That means he never really seriously questioned anything, which is why he is mediocre. The greatest human beings are those who have questioned and broken away from the past. The Buddha broke away from Hinduism, which included casteism and animal sacrifice and so on, brought something new into the world. Jesus Christ broke away from the Jewish religion, which believed that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is justice. He said, no, don't retaliate violence with violence. Socrates said, I'm not a Greek citizen. I'm a citizen of the world. So, if we value that kind of wisdom and understanding, we must inculcate it, this inquiry, the religious inquiry, into education. I have a few slides which I would like to show you, and then I end my talk. So I'll share my screen with you. Are you able to see it? So it says the role of education. A problem is not due to a lack of education, but the kind of education we are imparting. It has been caused by the highly educated MSCs, LLBs, PhDs, people like me, not by the uneducated man, the villager in India or Africa or Argentina. Because these are the people who become prime ministers, presidents, lawyers, diplomats, and maintain the machinery of war. Also, of course, the scientists who are engaged in that kind of research. So present day education is no barrier to barbarity. The Holocaust was perpetrated by highly educated people. So when we impart knowledge, we must also impart the wisdom to employ it rightly, responsibly. There is a poignant letter that was written by a survivor of the Holocaust in Spain. This letter was quoted by a psychologist named, Haim Ginott, who wrote the book Teacher and Child. It's a very famous book. In that, he quoted this letter. Dear teacher, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers. Children poisoned by educated physicians. Infants killed by trained nurses. Women and children shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So, I am suspicious of education. My request is that teachers help students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Atmans. Reading, writing, arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. That precisely expresses this lopsided development of the human mind and its consequences in society. Krishnamurti says on education, education may have a different meaning altogether, not merely transferring what is printed on a page to your brain. Education may mean opening the doors of perception to the vast movement of life. It may mean learning how to live happily, freely, not in hate and confusion, but in beatitude. Modern education is blinding us. We learn to fight each other. Right education is surely letting the mind free from its conditioning. Perhaps then there can be love, which in its action will bring about the true relationship between man and man. Here I have stated in the form of some equations what the ego does to our life. In the first column on the left are very natural capacities which we have. When you add the ego to it, see what it becomes. Love, when you add the ego to it, it turns into attachment, possessiveness. Wishes, which are normal things, I wish to go for a walk, I wish to meet my friend, add the ego to it and it turns into desire and addiction. Power turns into domination and exploitation. Sexuality turns into lust and pornography and rape. The ego is just self-interest, seeking something only for oneself. Friendship, we add the ego to it, becomes support and dependence. Humility becomes inferiority and servility. Talent becomes pride and vanity, superiority. Excellence, which is a natural demand of oneself to do as best as one can, turns into competition and rivalry. Group formation, we need to work together, and those groups are there. If you add the ego to it, it turns into division, nationalism. Thought, when the ego is attached to it, becomes worry, fear, anxiety. Pleasure, when ego is attached to it, becomes habit, addiction, boredom. Need, when ego is attached to it, becomes greed and covetousness. So it's important not to promote the ego in education. So I have then written the essential elements in my mind for the new vision of education, which is needed for the 21st century. Create a global mind, not a nationalistic mind, which feels for the whole world, belongs to the whole world, the entire humanity, does not attach itself to one fragment and work only for that fragment. but cares for the whole. Emphasize human development, not economic. At present, the education is set up for economic well-being of the nation, to produce goods. It doesn't care whether the human being is happy and whether he has goodness. So value goodness above efficiency. Encourage inquiry, not conformity. Respect for dissent. Cultivate cooperation, not competition. Teamwork is more important than individual achievement. Human beings find it so difficult to cooperate with each other, even more than animals do. Even the ant cooperates with all other ants and so on. But human beings find it so tough because of this ego process. Just a difference of opinion can cause a break in friendship. Democracy as a value instead of domination or feeling of superiority. Create a learning mind and not an acquisitive mind. That means awakening of intelligence is more important than cultivation of memory. This awakening of intelligence includes sensitivity. Create a mind that is both scientific and religious. Scientific, wanting to understand the external world, and religious, wanting to understand our own consciousness and all the negative emotions, how they arise, and so on, become aware of it. Under this, I have listed understanding the world and understanding ourselves. Both must go hand in hand. Being rational, which is scientific, and compassionate, which is religious. Respect for all life. A friend of nature, not master of nature. We are part of nature, and we have lost that feeling towards nature. We utilize it for economic development. And that is what has created all the ecological catastrophes about which we are reading every day in our magazines and so on. It is now threatening all life on Earth, as ecologists and scientists are pointing out. They are saying global warming has already crossed the point of return, and there is going to be major disasters we are going to face, all because we have lost our love of nature and look upon nature with a utilitarian mind. The ego is a big beggar. In every relationship, it is constantly asking something for itself. Be aware of the limitations of knowledge. It's nice to have knowledge, useful to have knowledge, but you have to go into this as to what knowledge is capable of and what it cannot do. It cannot bring you wisdom. The art of living. Krishnamurti talked about the art of living. At present, we teach art separately as painting, as sculpture, as literature, as poetry, and so on. But the art of living comes from this understanding our right relationship, let's say, with pleasure. Should I cut out pleasure or should I pursue pleasure? Both extremes go wrong. So the art of living is to have the right balance through awareness. You can learn that balance. It's not there is nobody else can draw that line and tell you so much pleasure is all right, after this don't indulge in pleasure. There's a very beautiful poem, I have probably quoted it earlier, but it bears repetition, by Blake, where he says, one who binds to himself a joy, does the winged life destroy. But one who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. Flowering in goodness is more important than achievement. Working with joy rather than for rewards. The perception of beauty, which is sensitivity, I talked about it, is more important than the pursuit of pleasure. Sensitivity as a drive, the joy will as a drive rather than ambition, which is achievement. And a holistic development of all faculties, not over specialization only in one area. So this is the vision of education, which is attempted in all the Krishnamurti schools. Now I must warn you that vision is not an ideal to be achieved. The vision is what gives you a direction. Like the pole star. The pole star, you don't go to the pole star, but it tells you the direction in which you are going. When India became independent, Gandhi gave such a consideration to Nehru, who was the prime minister. He said, whenever you are in two minds which decision to take, think of the poorest man on the road, and whichever decision would better his life, take that decision. So these are directives which way to go. It doesn't determine the next step. You have to use your intelligence to know whether that step is in the direction of the vision or against it. So I've listed the 6 schools which are in India, 1 in USA and 1 in UK, which have existed now for many years and which are constantly struggling to realize this vision in practice in a campus. Thank you. I'll end it here and we can discuss.
Thank you, sir. So first comment from Russell. Professor, I loved your statement, 100 years of K, about our inner lawyer justifying everything we do. His question is, do you think it is beneficial to actively examine our lives to observe how we rationalize our behavior?
You know, you can watch what is going on in your life with this question in mind and be aware and sensitive to both what your consciousness is doing and the consequences of that. And you will discover yourself what is the danger in that. The problem is that often we don't stay with the question long enough, and we look with a narrow vision and not with a long vision. So for example, belonging to a church or to a community gives a feeling of being secure because these are my people and they will care for me and so on. But when you see with a longer vision, you see that that creates division with other similar groups that get established, and that it leads to what? So when you perceive that, you have to drop the false. That is important. But if you are attached to the false, you don't drop it. You only talk about it. And that is a problem. The attachment is the problem. The false is not a problem. The attachment to the false is a problem. The false can be discovered to be false if you have a learning mind. But having discovered, are you willing to drop it? In science too, you have this, no? There were wrong, all kinds of false notions. And eventually, they had to be dropped. because the love of truth is greater than the love of illusion. And that has to be there in this field also. The love of truth has to be more than the love of comfort, because the truth may be very discomforting. Otherwise, you will refuse to see it.
So we have one more question. So if others have questions, we probably have 30 more minutes for questions before Mr. Rao talks about the Bay Area group and the Ojai Retreat group today at the end of the session. So if you have questions, please put in the chat box. Next question from Kanchan ji. What is the role of educator in triggering this religious inquiry in children?
At present, in Krishnamurti schools, they have what they call a culture class, where a teacher just enters the class and gets into discussion with the children, and they can raise any question about life in the school or what they have read in the newspaper happening and so on, or what is their own personal experience. And the teacher interacts with them. Depending on the wisdom of the teacher, that is inevitable. We cannot expose them to Krishnamurti's wisdom because we don't have that. And that is the difficulty of this interaction. So if the teacher is passing on his conditioning, then it just becomes an exchange of views. The child has certain views and the teacher gives him different views. But if you can go to the deeper thing as to what is friendship, why are we afraid of examinations? Why do you feel bad when you lose in a game to your friend? And so on. There are so many things in our daily life, also in the life of the child, that can be raised and questioned and discussed. Not answered, but just discuss it. Plant the question in his mind. Ultimately, what he does with the question, you don't have a control over that, but you have enabled him to come upon a deeper understanding of life. And he can come back with more questions. Always, never suppress a question. That's important for the teacher. Even in academic subjects, that is true, isn't it? If we were taught just Newton's law and you just memorized it and wrote the exam, you got the marks, it doesn't lead to deeper understanding. But when you use them to solve new problems, they give you homework, you work on them, and so on, your understanding goes deeper. So in the same way, in this field also, you must take the question and engage with it, stay with it. That's what Krishnaji said. The answer is not separate from the question, he said. You must stay with the question and search for it within the question. That can come to you like an insight, and a new perception can arise, provided you approach it with an open mind, a learning mind, and not a knowing mind which is only arguing for a particular point of view. That's why it is important not to be committed to any particular point of view.
So Shamal Raoji is asking, educate the educated. May I request you to elaborate the challenges faced in educating a teacher with a conditioned mind in the K schools?
Well, I just pointed out the danger and in the statement made in the letter which was quoted by Haim Kinot, It was just pointed out very poignantly the danger of all this division and how education can empower the individual. But if you don't combine that with compassion and love, he can use that power for domination, for cruelty. You can see that in your own life. You make a new gadget, the cell phone. The terrorist also uses the cell phone. He uses it for his cruelty. The bank robber also uses it. So these gadgets are neutral things. They can be used constructively and they can be used destructively. What determines which way you will use it? That is wisdom. That is coming from a deeper understanding of life and relationships, which education must enable. See, there are two concepts we have. One is the concept of God, and the other is the concept of the devil. For the Indians, it can be Ram and Ravan. The difference between them is not one of power. The devil is infinitely powerful, and so is God. The difference is that the devil is egoistic, selfish, unjust, violent. God is just and non-violent and has love and compassion. So the difference is not one of power. And when you are only cultivating power through education, you are not ensuring whether you are producing a Hitler or you are producing Mother Teresa or Gandhi. The school which Gandhi attended probably claims that they produced Gandhi. But I would like to ask the question, was Gandhi Gandhi because of the school or in spite of it? So it's very easy to claim something may not be true.
The Sabu Simon is asking, is there a difference between religious and spiritual education?
You see, the word spiritual has been used in many senses. All kinds of occult phenomena, extrasensory perception, telepathy, and so on is also called spiritual. We are not using the word spiritual in that sense. I'm using it in a very factual sense of the spirit or state of mind in which one is engaging in an activity. And that's an important thing to learn in education. There is both, in any activity, there is a method and a technique, but there is also a spirit. And education must impart the right spirit. In religion, the techniques and methods are the ritual and the techniques of meditation and so on. But the spirit of religion is one of love, compassion, and non-violence. When that spirit is not there, the performance becomes hollow, superficial. In sports, there is a method and a technique, and there is the sportsman spirit. If you don't have the sportsman spirit, the sport turns into something akin to war, except that you don't really kill each other. But you come upon all kinds of anger and hatred and so on, and disappointment and so on, because you're playing it very egoistically. In science, we did that in one of the previous talks. There is the technique and method of science, and there is the spirit of science. If you don't have the spirit of science, you are not a true scientist. You're just a technician. In art, The spirit of art is beauty. If you don't have a sense of beauty, what is it that you are trying to express through the art? So the spirit is always more important than the method or the technique. Without the spirit, the method or the technique is something mechanical. It is in that sense that I am talking about the spiritual. So when we say the education must give a high quality of life also in the spiritual realm, this is what I mean. And that is also there we talked about the relationship with pleasure. That is what is the spirit there. Is pleasure the same thing as joy? Does pleasure have to be pursued? And why? Why one is bored? If you are sensitive, you perceive joy in every activity in life. So there is thrill in every activity in life. It's only when you start measuring and comparing and saying this is not enough, I should have had more and so on. And then you pursue achievement. All that becomes an ego process. And the complication comes from the ego process. But if you are sensitive, you perceive beauty, which is the joy that is innately there in life. You don't create that joy. Your mind doesn't create that joy. It is there. Nature has put it there.
The next question from T.S. Sarmaji about KFI schools. Being in existence for several decades, what difference could the school have realized in the world?
Sir, how would you measure? All the measures are wrong, no? You find these comparative things which are in the newspapers and magazines as to which is the best school, which is the best college, and so on. But look at the criteria they use. The criteria they use is who got the maximum marks and ranks in the exam. What positions did the children get after passing from this school? And so on. Those criteria are all wrong criteria, isn't it? How will you assess whether the child is generous, affectionate, whether he relates well, whether he is happy in his marriage and treats his wife as an equal and as a friend? How will you measure? So it has no meaning to try to measure this. It is best to do this because that's the right thing to do. Whether it succeeds or not is not our concern.
The next question related to school again. How does a student graduated from K schools able to adjust with competitive world outside while keeping the unique teachings alive?
Yeah, that's a big problem. And we do discuss it with the children that when you go out, you will not find the same atmosphere out there. People will not be so concerned about you. They will just, teachers will come and give a lecture and walk off. It'll be your job, what you can make out of that lecture. They won't care for you in the university or in the college. And there will be competition and rivalry and so on. How will you meet them? You have to discuss that with the child. It's not only in the college, he sees it on television and his mind gets caught in all that. He also admires the hero. He also wants praise. He wants that he should also get society to praise him and applaud him. So all that directs him, makes him ambitious to achieve. How will you prevent that? You can only make him aware of this problem. Put this question in his mind, whether achievement is so important and why. And whether if your friend does better than you, why does one feel jealous? Why doesn't one feel happy for one's friend and feel delighted that he does so well? We teach our children to feel jealous. Normally, you must have noticed that when a child does very well, his brother comes and tells the parents, "Ma, our brother did so well." Then the parent says, "Stupid you, what are you doing? He did so well, but what are you doing?" And then put the seed of comparison and jealousy into the child. So you have to approach it differently, completely. That's why Krishnaji said it's a wholly different way of living. Wholly different way of living. Not, he didn't accept all these social criteria at all. He said social morality is immorality. It worships the man who dominates, who rises to the top. They were worshipping Hitler. All of Germany was worshipping Hitler. In India, they were worshipping Indira Gandhi just because she made Bangladesh independent from Pakistan. And that suited the Indian mind. False. All this is false. So unless you are very clear in your mind, you will get trapped. Without self-knowledge, the goodness does not last. It has to be rooted in deep understanding. Otherwise, you are influenced into goodness in a particular direction, and you will be influenced in a different direction into evil when your company changes. That is when you have no clarity in your own consciousness. To give that clarity and understanding to the child in education is the only protection. But the child also has to contribute to that. Just as in physics, I can teach physics to the child, but he has to work at it to deepen his understanding there. In the same way, you can talk all these things, but what he will do with all that talk and how far he will investigate for himself and come upon wisdom is entirely up to him. There's no way you can determine that. So don't treat it as an achievement. Treat it as a learning. It is necessary, therefore that learning needs to be imparted.
Thank you, sir. I'll keep to the questions related to education, and the other questions we can perhaps ask in the or voice in the next
Tomorrow.
next session. Yes. So the next one from Urmiji again. She's saying how does a student graduated from K Foundation able to add? I'm sorry. That's yeah. How are the extraordinary teachings imbibed in the children, certainly in K schools, and not to be overburdened at the raw age?
This is a question for educationists that you have to determine at each age what are the appropriate questions to discuss with the child at that age. You do that also in academics, no? You don't teach Pythagoras theorem to child who is 6-year-old. So you wait, and when he grows and he has enough understanding, then you teach that. You have to make that kind of assessment. But important thing is to emphasize inquiry right from the beginning in the child. Inquiry, not only religious inquiry, but all inquiry. You can inquire, why do we have these rules in the school? And you need to explain to him that a rule is just something which we have all agreed to. It's not that the school or the principal is an authority who has made the school and therefore we must all obey. You can question it. But if you understand the reason for the rule, then it becomes easy. You don't struggle against it. It becomes easy to follow the rule. To take an example, you tell the child, you must be punctual. And he says, sir, why? Why can I not come a little bit late? So you have to explain to him that so many people are waiting for you. And when you come in the middle of the session, it disturbs the session. So when you have consideration for others, you must be punctual. That's all. It's more important to have that consideration for others in the heart than to just follow a rule as a habit. And that's true for all rules, for all habits. You don't need rules if you have it all at the level of consciousness. Rules are framed because we don't have it at the level of consciousness. So vegetarianism can be a rule, and vegetarianism can be a natural consequence of compassion for the animal. In the second case, it has value. In the first case, it's just a habit. And it will break when you come across different company. You got influenced into one habit, you can get influenced into a different habit. That's why the deeper question is to free the mind of all habits and to function from the heart. That is transformation of consciousness. That is spiritual.
Sir Hansaji is asking, is there any course or book which can be introduced in our basic education at schools so as to increase sensitivity?
I think that Miss Ahalya Chari wrote a book called Thinking Together, which had several chapters which raised questions for children. She was a teacher and she was principal of the Rajghat Bessel School for a long time, 6 years or so. And she wrote this book after retiring from here. And we used that book in the culture classes with children of the appropriate age. But grown-up children like higher secondary classes and so on, you can discuss with them the way we are discussing now here. They're almost like adults, you can. Provided you have also done that earlier. Otherwise, it is the level of ignorance that matters, not the age.
So Deepika ji is asking, what is the difference of a child demanding what they want or actually inquire?
Say that again.
What is the difference of a child demanding what they want or actually inquiring? Their want versus their inquiry.
I understand.
Yes.
So the child comes and demands something. It's for you to look at that demand, to listen to him with respect, see what he's demanding and whether it's a need or it's in the area of greed. And if it is a need, can you fulfill it? If it is greed, can you explain to him why that is an unreasonable demand? So that's why, in a residential school, when you are living with the child 24 hours of the day, there's a lot of opportunity on the games field, during a debate, in an essay competition, in a going for a walk in nature. There are any number of times, if there is no fear in his mind, he'll come up and talk with you. So you have to be a friend to the child. A friend, you're not afraid of a true friend. You're just sharing. So that if there is no fear, and fear is absolutely anathema, because you can see in your own consciousness, when you are afraid, you don't speak your mind. If he is afraid of you, he will say what you want to hear, and he will say something else behind your back. So it teaches hypocrisy. You force him to lie. Therefore, that's why fear is counterproductive. There should be absolutely no fear anywhere on the campus, which doesn't mean he is free from fear, because there is also free of public opinion, fear of failure, and so on, which you need to discuss with him. So you need to discuss what is the reason for examinations, what is the purpose of examination. He thinks examinations are to evaluate and compare him with the others. You have to point out, no, examinations is just because teachers need to know what you have understood and what you have not understood to decide on the further education. And you also need to know that. Therefore, we must do an honest evaluation. It's not really to compare you or compete you with other children. So unless you make these things clear, he has a fear of examination. And he is trying to memorize things one day before the exam, because he wants to impress you and his parents with marks which he gets, whether he obtains that by cheating or he obtains them through his understanding. So I give you a question. We think it is very wrong for a child to copy in the examination from another child, and we rusticate him if he does that. Now, if he just memorizes the answers and writes them, isn't that also a form of cheating? He's cheating himself and the examiner, the teacher, showing that he has a certain amount of knowledge when he really does not have. It is simply he has crammed it up from some question answer book and put it back into the question paper. So you have to talk all these things so that he no longer has the desire to copy an examination. And he's not trying to memorize and read things at the last minute, because he is also interested in knowing his own level of understanding in that subject.
Thank you, sir. In couple of minutes, maybe we can have one more question and then we hand it over to Mr. Rao. Many years have passed away and the right education has not been permeated in the society. This is from Salvador. He's saying this is a threat to human survival. Ego is moving faster than the self-knowledge. Is the end of human being a fatal destiny?
It does look like that, not only to me, but there are several books being written by ecologists and scientists, brilliant minds who have studied this problem and who are saying that humanity is not likely to survive the 21st century. That means we are going in the wrong direction. And I pointed that out, that we are still, all our research effort is directed in what direction? To make a still faster computer, to make a still faster aeroplane, to go still further into space, and so on. It's okay to be doing that, but to be doing only that, when your real problems are ecological problems, ego problems, war problems, and so on. You keep on doing only that, it's not intelligent, no? You are caught in a rut. You are doing that because that's what you have learned how to do. Are you willing to change? Are you willing to give your attention in a different direction? That's what it means. It's a very practical thing. Is education solving our problems which we are facing today? Is more important than just that achievement that one more gadget, new gadget you produce. What does that contribute? So the whole emphasis on having still more comfort, still faster abilities, better ability is nonsensical. We have enough ability. We don't need more ability now. We need more of kindness, goodness, not efficiency, goodness. But we are not applying ourselves in that direction. I agree with the questioner, Salvador, that the very vision of education globally is faulty. When the vision is faulty, you can put in a lot of effort and energy into working with that vision, the whole thing becomes wrong. That's why you must be clear about the vision, and the vision dictates what kind of school you will have, how many children you will have, how you will make the classrooms, what your interaction will be, etc. Because you want to go in the direction of that vision. But when you have a wrong vision, you are going in the wrong direction. You want to go still faster. I mean, to satirically, I would say that the end point of our life is that cremation ground, right? In Manikarnika Ghat. You want to go faster there? Go ahead, good luck. That's a sarcastic comment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rao, over to you now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rohan. Dear friends, as we get closer to this talks from Professor Krishna, I just want to share a couple of things. From the feedback that I received from the participant, which echoes my own, I feel greatly indebted towards Professor Krishna for his generosity, for his unselfish giving of his time with these talks. Personally, I'm touched by his talk on global violence and his interactions with G.D. Krishnamurti. At a deep level, the need to change myself in order to bring about a change in the society hit me hard. If I'm in disorder and I'm in conflict, I bring it out into all my relationships, into the family, among friends, as well as the society. It is clear. Therefore, I feel a great sense of responsibility towards myself and the clarity that I need to bring into my consciousness, because this will affect all relationships. Professor Krishna, sir, thank you for writing the book, A Jewel on the Silver Platter, giving talks on investigation into the teachings based on the book, and above all, whenever our dialogue group makes a request of you, you are there always, willing and accommodating with a smile, humility, and affection. Sir, thank you for everything. A couple of words. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. But from my side, it's just, we are talking as friends.
Yes, sir.
I'm not really imparting I just explained that wisdom cannot be imparted. So
Yes, sir.
I'm really elaborating the questions on which I have myself been working. And
Yes, sir.
you must not take this sharing to be an authentic um, description of Krishnamurti's teaching. You must go to his books and get that directly. These are my investigations, which are based on what I have learned at his feet. That is true. But I cannot say that this is the wisdom of the teacher. It is my understanding. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Very good, sir.
In
Just a
doing this,
couple of, yes,
I also learn.
yes, sir. A couple of words about our dialogue group, if I may, at this point.
Sure.
Bay Area J. Krishnamurti Dialogue Group we've been meeting regularly for the past 10 years. We are located near San Francisco, California. We used to meet in person before the pandemic hit the world last year. Now we meet online on Zoom, and we meet on Saturday afternoons at 2 o'clock California time. I just want to say a couple of words about the intention behind the dialogue group. I think it's very important. There are different kinds of dialogue groups that are out there, and ours might be slightly different. The intent behind our dialogue groups is not so much as to learn J. Krishnamurti's teachings, but to dive deeply into the issues of daily living. We come together as friends that share common problems of life and living. We think together and work together as we try to see the element of falsehood in the issues that create havoc in our lives. In working with others, one may be able to clearly see the workings of one's own mind, and that which is false may be dropped as one observes oneself in conversation and in relationship with others. Typically, the dialogue tends to move slowly in the beginning as we connect on commonality of the meanings of the words used by different participants. And as we understand one another clearly, dialogue moves and begins to go deep. Typically, an unresolved issue or a question remains towards the end of the dialogue, and that turns out to be the starting point for the next time when we meet. So this is our intention. Not always are we successful in implementing this intention in our dialogue process. And if you're interested in joining our dialogue group and knowing that our timings are 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoons in California time, keep that in the back of your mind. Please reach out to Rohan or myself. And then the email addresses Rohan had already provided, eagastya@gmail.com or rsudhiroj@gmail.com. He has already provided those things. And I cannot forget the following ever. Rohan, thank you, my friend, so much for all the work you do for our dialogue group. I'm indeed grateful to you on all our behalf. And the other person that I'm quite grateful to you on behalf of our group is one of the most silent and humble helpers in all our logistics arrangements, Dr. Asif Kumar. Asif Kumar. Sir, we couldn't have done any of these programs in the last 3 years without help. And this year, the Ojai Retreat Group have joined us in organizing this program. And you can reach Ojai Retreat Group at www.ojairetreatgroup.org. And this information we can provide you by email as well. And I'm thankful to Ulrich for for joining us this time. Above all, on behalf of Mr. Ulrich and their group and our group, I would like to extend a thank you to the participants who have shown a great deal of interest in Krishnamurti's teachings and participated, asked questions, and hung on with those questions so that they can dive deep into it along with everybody. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Rohan, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Rao. Thank you so much, everybody. And this is the end of session 11. So we meet tomorrow for the final session of the series. So see you, at least see you, some of you tomorrow. Thank you.